Hey, what's going on everybody? Gareth here at FCP Euro. Welcome back to another tech tip video. Today we're going to be talking about the cooling system on your F80 M3, F82 F83 M4, and F87 M2 comp. So basically 2015 to 2018 M3, 2015 to 2020 M4, and your 2019 to 2021 M2. So any vehicle that has the S55 engine in it. We need to start off by saying there is a ton of different parts in these cars. It is a pretty sophisticated cooling system, and we're going to talk about the different components, how they work, which parts are what, and how to make sense of everything that you're looking at. It's a very cluttered engine bay. You're not going to be able to see a lot, but we have a bunch of diagrams and things that are going to help you in this video explain how all this stuff works together, things to be aware of, and how to work on these systems appropriately. So with that said, let's get into it. So starting here on the table, we have a small selection of parts that are part of the cooling system for the S55 engine. Most notably, we have two different expansion tanks. We have a big one and a small one. The reason for that is this is a split cooling circuit car. And what I mean by that is you have a high temp circuit, which is for cooling the engine and everything related to the engine. So turbochargers also be responsible for providing coolant to the heater core. And then you have your low temp cooling circuit, which is for the tiny expansion tank here, which is only responsible for the air to water charge cooler for the intake on this engine. We're going to talk about that in a minute, but of course, with that said, we have a bunch of auxiliary radiators inside the wheel well. We have two radiators up front, a smaller one and a larger one for the engine, one for the air to water heat exchanger, mechanical water pump. That is one thing that changed on the S55 from your N52, N54, N55, went back to a mechanical water pump that's driven by a belt. There are 3 electric water pumps on this car. 2 of them are very visible. One of them is a little bit obscured, but we're going to talk about that here in a moment as well. And then of course there's a whole bunch of different hoses and the routing for those hoses, and we're going to talk about that too. With that said, let's go over to the car. I'm going to start pointing out some of these major components that you can easily see from the top and really dive into things you need to be aware of when you're owning one of these cars and when you're about to work on the cooling system. So the S55 powered BMWs, they have 6 heat exchangers that have coolant flowing through them. Some are air to water, some are water to air, but to count them off, we have the charge cooler here. I'm holding the original charge cooler from this car. I'm going to talk about this in a moment. You have your primary radiator up front for the high temp circuit, that's water to air, your charge cooler radiator, which is water to air, your 2 auxiliary coolers in the wheel wells, and then you also have your heater core. The heater core does count as a heat exchanger because, well, that's how the inside of your car stays warm when it's cold outside. But that said, I really want to start off by talking about the low temp cooling system. And you'll notice here we have this upgraded CSF charge cooler. Very common modification is to upgrade these charge coolers, but this is important to know, the charge coolers are a failure item. The coolant circuit that flows coolant through this, you have basically a core right here where water passes through, air comes through, and the hot air coming through here goes through this core, exchanges the heat, comes out this side cooler. And this is a very efficient system, but your biggest problem with this type of cooling circuit is if you have any kind of failure of this core, it's going to cause the engine to start to ingest coolant. And there are some very obvious signs with that. Most notably, you'll be lacking coolant inside this tiny little expansion tank. I think a huge fail from BMW is these do not have a level sensor in them. So the only warnings that you're going to have are going to be visual, i.e. that you check it from time to time, or what will happen is if the level is low enough, the water pump, which flows coolant through the low temp circuit, you'll have a fault code for it for an overspeed. That's because there's cavitation. Cavitation is going to occur when there's a lack of coolant in the system, and the only place that coolant could be going is leaking from a hose, leaking out of the charge cooler, or you have a leaking radiator up front, which of course, being all the way up front is particularly failure prone. All the way up front is your heat exchanger or radiator for the air to water charge cooling system. This radiator is the most exposed in the front, so any kind of debris could hit it, potentially damage it, start leaking. So you could have a leak from the radiator, you could have a leak at the charge cooler, any one of the hoses maybe even the expansion tank. But the fault code you're going to get for that is an overspeed of the electric water pump, which is tucked down there behind the radiator fan. It's the largest electric water pump in the cooling system. It's all controlled by PWM, so it varies the speed and output based on demand. But that pump, you'll have that fault code. If you see that fault code, it means you have a leak. It means you're missing coolant. And I really recommend in that particular case, you really don't want to risk heavy water ingestion in one of these engines, or any engine for that matter. You'll have misfires, all sorts of other things. And when the low temp cooling circuit is not functioning properly and you drive the car hard, you will start to get misfires because the air intake temperatures get very, very high. So you'll have the fault codes for the pump. You might be missing coolant. All in, something to be aware of. And when you're dealing with the low temp cooling circuit specifically, because it has an electric water pump, my recommendation is you're going to want to vacuum fill it first to make sure the entire system is evacuated of air. And then you're going to use the electric bleeding procedure. So there's a procedure you can follow in the car to turn the electric water pump on. That's going to circulate coolant and bleed out all the air through the expansion tank right here, and then you're not going to have any problems. If you try that procedure before you vacuum fill the system, the pump may not start because it detects that the pump is overspeeding due to air in the circuit down low. Just to be aware, you could run into that problem. It's pretty simple. You've got all of these hoses that connect, so these hoses come in. You have your expansion tank, which acts as, both a reservoir and allows for the expansion of coolant due to temperature increase. We have our radiator up front, which is our primary heat exchanger, and then we have another heat exchanger in this front right wheel well that is also for the low temp cooling circuit. And we'll just talk about the expansion tanks again really quick. Your little expansion tank is for the low temp circuit. Again, no coolant level sensor. And then your large expansion tank is for the engine cooling circuit, which is going to be for the engine, the turbocharger cooling, as well as your heater core. This does have an integrated level sensor. And of course, it's a pretty large volume simply because that system has a lot more coolant in it. One thing to note, both on your low temp expansion tank and the high temp expansion tank, they have built-in filters inside to help filter out debris that could be in the system. So typically these are being replaced when a split happens between the top and the bottom. You can kind of see how this is two pieces that are then plastic welded together. But if you have lots of contamination in your cooling system, you might actually have a flow problem too. So I would take a look at the screens if you can actually get a sight on them, and consider replacing these in case there is contamination. The only time you're going to have contamination is if the car had the incorrect coolant in it, and then you have a bunch of corrosion happening inside the engine block and inside the cooling system, but that's generally not an issue to worry about pending the correct coolants in the car. And for the expansion tanks, you have the caps. If you look at the caps, we have O-rings. Very two obvious ones here, and then this has a single large O-ring for your small cap. Now, these are pressure regulating, so for example, this is a 2-bar cap. I wish I knew what the rating was for the smaller cap, but what's interesting is there's not going to be a lot of pressure in that low temp circuit. There's going to be a lot more pressure in the high temp circuit strictly because of volume. That said, I'm going to show you something about the low temp circuit expansion tank cap. We're going to come over here to this second gen Mini Cooper S. So here on this R56 Cooper S, I'm going to take this cap off. That looks oddly familiar, doesn't it? So this cap was the coolant circuit expansion tank cap on Mini Coopers in the second gen, and it's currently used as a expansion tank cap for your front wheel drive based BMWs and your Generation 3 Minis. So you do want to make sure that the O-rings are in good shape. If those O-rings are torn or damaged or missing, you're gonna have a problem. So just be aware of that. Here I have our intercooler charge cooler radiator, which is gonna be the radiator all the way up front. So when you look at the center core, you're gonna have your low temp circuit radiator all the way up front, your AC condenser in the middle, and then your engine cooling radiator directly behind it, and then your radiator fan. All this stuff is sort of wedged in there. And then of course, if you have a dual clutch transmission, there's also going to be a trans cooler down here as well. But all of these things are literally stacked here in the center core. And then we have our auxiliary radiators, which are inside the wheel wells. So when you look through this grill here, this is what you're physically seeing, is one of these. Now from BMW, these have aluminum end tanks on them. They're not plastic end tanks like the main radiator would be. But if you look at how these mount, these are side specific. So they can only go in one way. CSF has an upgraded version of these with a rock guard, which, to be honest with you, is not a bad idea because you can get pretty good chunks of debris going through this little grill here. This rock guard is going to help protect it, but these are universal. So it's basically one part number for both sides. You just simply swap the fittings to where they need to go. And that's a little bit of a nicer setup. And again, you're adding additional cooling capacity to the system. I think one thing to note on these cars is you can get an upgraded radiator for the intercooler circuit. You can get upgraded auxiliary radiators. You can get upgraded charge cooler, but there are no upgraded primary radiators. And the reason for that is these cars have so much cooling capacity that the primary radiator really does not need to be upgraded. By changing the auxiliary coolers and your intercooler radiator, that is where the most efficiencies are gained on this car. So pretty much the entire CSF suite covers all of that, minus the main radiator, because that's not really something that you need to worry about on these cars. So this car has 4 water pumps on it. 1 mechanical, 3 electrical. Your large electrical water pump, this is going to be for the charge cooling low temp circuit. So this is the only thing that moves volume through the entire system. So this is a 3-pin pulse width modulated pump. So it's got ground, 12-volt power, and then a PWM signal that controls the speed, which is going to be directly tied to, you know, the temperature of the intake charge, throttle mapping. There's multiple ways in which this works, but again, this is a potential problem where if this pump were to fail, you're going to have misfires happening because the intake air charge is very, very high. And if you have a system leak, this is going to be the only thing that's going to warn you that you have a problem in that system, because once you have cavitation, this will overspeed, it'll shut the pump off, and then you have to start troubleshooting if there's a leak or if it's simply not filled correctly or whatever the case might be. So this is a warning part and also a necessary part for the functioning of the system. Moving along, we've got these 2 smaller electric water pumps. One of these is used for the turbocharger after run pump. So this is going to be responsible for flowing coolant through the turbochargers after you shut the car off. Because the engine uses a mechanical water pump that's driven by a belt, after the engine shut off, it's really important to make sure that coolant is still flowing through the turbochargers so that oil doesn't cook off in there or anything like that. So these pumps will run, or this pump will run, and continue to flow coolant through the engine, through the radiator, to make sure that those temperatures start to drop down and prolongs the life of your turbocharger. And then ironically enough, the same electric water pump is all the way here on the other side of the engine bay, tucked under the intake manifold. It's actually a water pump for the heater core. So I'd say that's probably the least critical item in this. And then we have our mechanical water pump right here, which on the N52, N54, N55 family of engines, N5X is what we like to call it here. They all used electric water pumps, which were mounted on the side of the engine block. The S55 is a very similar architecture, but it has a mechanical water pump. This is like any water pump that you would have seen. Literally has a pulley that sits right here. You have an impeller, big gasket. There's really not much to talk about on this pump itself, aside from, you know, if you have any play in the bearing, you might get some coolant weeping. But what's very interesting about the design of this is your thermostat bolts here, and this is the connection for the lower radiator hose. So this is the cool side, so coolant's flowing in, water pump is pulling coolant through, and then you have your hot side coming out this way, and actually technically through here, this is still cold coolant going to the cylinder head, and then you have additional coolant flow through here. But if you look on the water pump, you'll see this opening right here. This is actually the return for the turbocharger coolant lines. So this is gonna be the hot side in, and when the pump is running after you shut the car off, it's basically bypassing your thermostat, flowing coolant through the pump housing, back to the cylinder head, and moving coolant through the system, even if this is not spinning. So if you're replacing one of these water pumps, you want to make sure that you have the O-ring for that return line from the turbochargers, because, well, you really would not want this to leak here. And even though you can't see it right now, it is buried in there. And the last thing you want to do is have a little O-ring here be the source of coolant leak that you then have to take all the stuff back apart to get to, because let me tell you, it is buried in there. So as we covered, the S55 powered BMWs have a ton of different cooling system components, both a high temp and low temp circuit, which are separate from each other. So what we've done at FCP Euro for these cars is any cooling component that is part of the low temp charge cooling circuit, we have that under air intake, all the hoses, the charge cooler, the radiator, auxiliary radiator, to make that abundantly clear that that is for a low temp circuit. And then any component that's for the engine cooling circuit, we have underneath the cooling system category. So they're totally separate from each other. Shouldn't be any confusion about any hoses or any of the major components that are tied to these systems. Because again, you know, how do you explain which radiators for what? Really just wanted to make it clear. So one side is under air intake and the other side is going to be underneath cooling system. So hope you learned a lot in this video. If you have any questions or comment, leave in the comment box below. If you like this video, hit the like button. And of course, you'll want to hit subscribe, because we always have a ton of content like this on the way. And we'll see you for the next one. Thanks for watching.
You need your outro one more time, and then say if you're